Welcome to The Cow Behind the Barn, a podcast exploring humanity, the world, and the divine as experienced and interpreted by an artist. I'm Kevin Caldwell, co-founder of the Table Collective. Rocks and plants, consciousness and self, and the implications of all of that for what kind of world we live in and what it means to say I, or you, or we for that matter. I started to scratch the surface of all this in the last episode, in which I described 4 dimensions of consciousness, at the very center of which were experience and awareness. So, one-dimensional consciousness, a subject experiences what happens. 2-dimensional, a subject experiences and is aware of experiencing. 3-dimensional, a subject experiences, is aware and is aware of being aware. And then multidimensional, a subject experiences, is aware of being aware, and is aware of the experiences and awareness of other things and beings. Now, whether anyone or anything actually possesses this 4th type is a question I'm going to leave open for now. So to keep myself to something episode length for this particular episode, I made a decision to limit my focus in 2 ways. I'm only going to be looking in this episode, at least, at types 1, 2, and 3, and I'm only looking at non-human aspects of the world. So not people, and not the divine, at least not in the way that I describe what could be divine consciousness in my multidimensional level. But rocks are on the table, as are plants and mosses, molds, animals, insects, birds, reptiles, fish, germs, subatomic particles that make up all of that. Not that I can examine each of those individually, of course. I'm going to need to be selective, and I may not get to all of them in this episode. Here's the question that I'm exploring a little bit more succinctly. Does anything in the cosmos have consciousness within those parameters that I've just given? And if so, what things? And is it everything? And what type of consciousness and how? So then I had to think about how to go about this. Throughout the podcast, I regularly turn to philosophy and religion and physics and the arts when I'm looking for answers. And typically, I look at religious heritages last. And I did it that way because I assumed that some of my listeners, at least, would prioritize the value of, like, physics as a source of truth over, say, religion. What's been interesting to me is the fact that religious traditions have often seen, in different ways, what physics and philosophy theorized about, and actually, in many cases, religions did so much earlier. Religious or spiritual ways of knowing are important, and they're valid ways of knowing. This time, then I'm going to begin with religion. Though before I do so, I want to share a creative piece. I'm fascinated, have long been fascinated by trees. And I've been exploring imaginatively the idea that trees might have memory, that their memories might include whatever has happened to them or around them. And I had begun to write a song about trees just before I started to prepare for this episode, and I completed that song the day I recorded the podcast, meaning that for me, in real time, I finished it today. This is a very quick home recording, just me and my guitar, and it's likely to change quite a bit before it ever gets out there in more public consumption. But raw as it may be, it seems to fit with the theme. And so here it is, Memories of Trees.
Memories of trees are stored in ancient circles that are curling. Wheels upon wheels of stories unseen, growth rings are unfurling. Trees measure out their lives, concentric, passing years and days. Pattern of circles that shrinks and swells, seasons of dry and rain. Memories of trees recall the echoed laughter of the voices of the ones who made their plans. Leaf shade dancing on their faces. Leaves carry our dreams in the silent trees. They may fall or they may burn, turn back to the dust, dreams and leaves. Still breathing, waiting to return in the memories of trees. Memories of trees lean down to catch every eager whispered word, turn them into the flowing sap with all the voices they have heard. Trees are waiting to tell the world all those things they have stored away. They embrace our songs within their rings, holding all we used to say. Memories of trees are swelling, shrinking, wide and narrow, distilled into their amber sap to record a new tomorrow. Leaves carry our dreams in the silent trees. They may fall or they may burn, turn back to the dust, dreams and leaves. Still breathing, waiting to return in the memories of trees. Leaves carry our dreams in the silent trees. They may fall or they may burn, turn back to the dust, dreams and leaves. Still breathing, waiting to return in the memories of trees. Memories of trees. Memories of trees.
Trees and memories, consciousness. That's my signal to go back to the way that religious heritages might answer my questions about the nature of consciousness and the self. I'm going to focus here on two religious heritages, animism and Hinduism. Now, that's an incredibly simplistic way of stating things. There are many animisms and many types of Hinduism. In fact, in the latter case, one could argue there's no such thing as Hinduism per se, that the term developed in the West to describe any number of more or less related expressions of spirituality in the part of the world that we call South Asia. Be that as it may, let me start with animism. And why start here? I chose to do so because it's an ancient and nearly universal way of living, and living in and understanding the world. It's a different way of seeing the world, a very ancient way. Our ancestors were not stupid people, and we shouldn't equate a lack of scientific education with a lack of intelligence. The animistic way of seeing and relating is, I presume, a storehouse of experiential wisdom and insight, which is as important a source of knowledge as is modern physics. I don't pit them against each other. I see them actually as two ways of knowing, which in conversation with one another can both serve to illumine and teach us. The indigenous peoples of the Americas, Africa, Melanesia, Polynesia, and more all describe worldviews and practices and experiences that have been described as animism. Comparing them reveals that animism is not one single thing. As I've said, there are animisms. However, although animism, when understood in the abstract, is full of variety, there is a consistency when we view animism as essentially a way of relating to the various beings and things in the world. That way of relating attributes sentience, understanding, mind, consciousness, to other beings, including persons, animals, plants, spirits, forces of nature, planets, wind, oceans, rivers, stones, metals, and, especially more recently, even items of technology, cars, robots, computers. I'm going to be looking at animism in three lenses. First, even though I've said that animism is more a way of relating to the world, I'll spend a little time on the conceptual aspect or definition of the term. Second, I want to talk about the functional aspects, that is, how it works, so to speak, how people who have this way of seeing the world operate within it. And finally, I want to explore what I might call the imaginative, intuitive, experiential way of seeing and being aware of the world, particularly the way of seeing, understanding, consciousness. So first, animism as a concept. One way to begin is to clarify what animism is not. Obviously, animism is not a form of materialism, which posits that only matter, materials, and the movement of those exist. Nor is animism a form of monotheism, which posits that a single God exists in the universe, a supreme one. And perhaps less obvious, it's not a form of polytheism. That's the belief that there are many gods and spirits that populate the world. In animism, sentience, consciousness, is more akin to a vital force, a life force, something that animates objects and plants and animals, hence the term animism. Both theism and polytheism tend towards the view that God or the gods are what we might call transcendent, in the sense of being outside of, other than the world and its various objects and creatures. In monotheism, while there's typically room for a variety of spiritual beings, one of those transcendent beings is primary, greater than the others, and generally is seen as the creator of the rest. So different in kind, not just degree. Whereas in polytheism, there may be different degrees or levels or qualities of the gods. The gods are basically all of the same stuff, but they might be of different kinds. The main distinguishing feature of animism as a concept, however, is that the spirits or vital forces are immanent, that is, they are within the everyday world, even if not always perceivable. They're right there, in and with everything, or most things, depending on which expression of animism we're looking at. Now, so far, I've referred to things in the plural, spirits, vital forces, but this is actually something which different types of animism see differently. Some would say it's the same spirit that is alive and permeating everything. That is, some forms of animism would say that, while other forms of animism would see the world to be inhabited by energies, plural, forces, plural, spirits, plural. And this also leads to a question about another theism, by the way, this idea of the immanent presence of spirits or a spirit. And that other theism is pantheism. Pantheism is the view that everything's not just pervaded by spirit, but actually is spirit. Animism does not equate the spirits or a single spirit with the world. It sees the world as inhabited and animated and acted upon by those spirits or spirit, but does not equate them. So it's not pantheism. Now, moving from this more abstract way of understanding animism, I will touch now on how such a view functions, how people with such a way of seeing the world actually live within it. At the very core of the functional dimension of animism is the understanding that there's a reciprocity between all things and all beings, and in particular between human beings and the wider collective of animate beings with which human beings are interconnected, or, to use my earlier term, entangled. While all humans share in this reciprocal relationship with everything else, one of the primary ways that this reciprocity is negotiated is through particular people who seem more than usually adept at navigating the ways of the forces and spirits which animate the world. Such people are sometimes referred to with terms that are used pejoratively: witch doctors, witches, or more commonly perhaps for anthropologists, shamans. I'm more interested here in the functions than the persons or the roles, much less the names that are given to those roles. Because what these special people do is something that is in fact available to everyone. And it shows us then how the world can operate in an animistic view of it. And at least that's the way that we're going to be looking at it here, the way animism sees it. So as such, I'm going to list the following functions just as they are, as functions. So in animism, human beings have access to and influence in the world of both good and bad spirits. Human beings have the ability to heal various ailments of the body and the spirit. They have the ability to mediate communication between the human and the spirit worlds. And in animism, humans have the ability to obtain solutions to problems by consulting the spirits. Now, as important as it is to have a grasp of the conceptual and functional aspects of animism, I'm especially interested in ways of seeing consciousness and selfhood, as animism might describe these, and particularly the consciousness of non-human things and objects and beings. So I'm going to set aside for a moment the type of animism in which there's one spirit pervading everything and focus on the view that there are plural spirits and forces. Are all these spirits and forces of the same type? Or are they different? In other words, are they different examples of the same thing, or are they different things? So to illustrate, let me ask it this way. Are the spirits like, say, plants in a forest, where there's many types of plants, but yet they're all plants? That's the only thing in the forest is plants, let's say. And they're all plants, but there's different kinds. There's bushes and trees, etc. Or is it more like a forest in which every plant is the same kind of plant, like a forest in which there are only lodgepole pines? Animism suggests that the spirits and forces that inhabit our world are more like the forest full of different plants. All spirits, so all plants, but different types, so not all lodgepole pines. Some forms of animism, for example, describe the spirits of animals as people, like us, because they can grow and breathe, whereas the spirits of stones are alive, but not personal. This opens the question as to how animism might view my descriptive dimensions, 1, 2, and 3. It would seem that some things are not conscious beyond the level of experiencing, so that would be level 1, whereas others seem also to be aware, and so that's level 2, and it seems in some examples at least are also aware of being aware, level 3, or dimension 3. For example, in the view of the Western Apache of North America, there are certain locations that actually contain memories and also have the wisdom to be able to help people to make the right decisions, meaning apparently they can communicate, or more accurately, the consciousness that inhabits these places can communicate. And this indicates to me a level of awareness at least the second or third dimension that I've described. And I need to mention machines here for a moment, because I've referred a few times in passing to the fact that in some animistic ways of thinking at least, consciousness in the form of spirits and forces can be attributed to machines, to human-made objects, to technological items, which may at first appear to be without agency or life force, or as other things and beings might have it. However, some animists describe machines as having agency, vitality, even personhood, which of course is going to raise a lot of questions for thinking about AI, but that might need to be saved for another time. So that's a look at animism and its view of consciousness, and I'll come back to see how it might answer my basic question a bit later, but let me turn now to the Gita. The second religious heritage I want to look at is actually not a heritage in and of itself. It's a text which has inspired multiple religious heritages, the Bhagavad Gita. I've consulted the Gita in prior episodes, and it is a rich, vast world of oceanic depths. I'm going to try to summarize some of the main concepts, knowing full well that the best way to learn from the Gita is to return to it over and over and slowly begin to gain an inner, intuitive grasp of its voice and flow and unique wisdom. And my summary here is very selective, focused just on things related to consciousness. I need to explain 3 terms used to describe the nature of consciousness and the self: prakriti, purusha, and buddhi. Prakriti. Prakriti is what we would normally experience and describe as the material nature of the universe, the natural world. And it's experienced by us through 6 senses: sight and hearing, taste, smell, touch, the 5 we're more accustomed to in the West, but also the mind, which is seen as one of the senses because, like those other senses, it is part of how we engage with and experience the world. This is beginning to touch on the Gita's understanding of consciousness. Prakriti itself is actually unconscious matter. It's uncaused. It's always been there. It has no beginning, and it will not end. It's in a reciprocal relationship with what we think of as ourselves, because all of our actions find their source in Prakriti. Ultimately, according to the Gita, though, none of us actually do anything. Not as independent actors. We only seem to act as such. In the end, it's actually Prakriti and the small s self, or small a Atman, which is embedded in Prakriti, which all combine in what we call action. This is one of those oceanic depths of the Gita, and I'm going to have to leave it here for now and move on to the next term, which is Purusha. This is what we might call the spiritual self, or pure consciousness, perhaps. According to Gita, there is an eternal, unchanging consciousness that is aware of and enables Prakriti. It's the true subject. It's the true I. And ultimately, it is also our true self, though that's not perceived except in the process of enlightenment and transformation that is outlined and taught by the Gita. And that brings me to the term buddhi. This is the faculty of insight and wisdom, and it's vitally connected to the process of transformation that the Gita teaches, which involves liberation from the ways that we're stuck in and stuck by being embedded in Prakriti, and this deluded perception that we have of reality and actually of ourselves, involving both small a Atman and small and big A Atman. So what does the Gita then actually say about consciousness? How do I try to summarize this? Given that the mind is one of the senses and that it operates within and as part of Prakriti, consciousness in the sense of being aware and in the sense of the awareness of being aware is not the same as pure or ultimate consciousness, which is something wholly other and actually beyond awareness. At the end of the day, the I, which is speaking in the person of Krishna in the Gita, is an I that pervades everything in the cosmos, including us, and in which every other I, small I, is ultimately to be found, or in which it ultimately exists. So in the 15th section of the Gita, beginning from around the 13th verse, Krishna is said to say things like this, and I'm going to quote several things from a number of verses around that portion. Quote, "Entering the earth, I support all beings with energy. I abide in the bodies of all living beings. I entered into the hearts of all beings. From me come memory and knowledge." I include that last part because it really starts to touch on what we normally think of as consciousness or aspects of consciousness. But what does the Gita say about what in the cosmos is conscious, and in what way? What we typically think of when we say, I'm conscious or aware or know or remember, according to the Gita, is actually all enmeshed in Prakriti, and therefore small a Atman, small s self. Consciousness itself is the I Krishna refers to, which is ultimately singular, one big C consciousness. I'm going to have to leave it there for now, but I'll come back to try to summarize how animism and the Gita see things in a bit. Given that I included a creative offering earlier that is probably more akin to the way animism sees consciousness when I did my song Memories of Trees, I want to offer something perhaps more in line with the Gita, though it was inspired by an experience in the mountains of California. I read that when white men first asked indigenous peoples what they called the high mountains we know as the Sierra Nevadas, the answer was Inyo, which the white men thought was the name of a place, but which for the people was simply descriptive. They pointed, or the white men pointed, "What is that called?" To which the people responded, "That's where the Great Spirit lives, Inyo." Given that the Gita, as well as some forms of animism, as we saw, sees consciousness of the world in terms of a single spirit as the ultimate source of or kind of consciousness, this song seemed fitting to share here. It can be sung as if the singer is singing to the Great Spirit, or can be heard as if the Great Spirit is singing to you and I. So here's Inyo.
Hey, are you listening to me today? Hey, will you hear what I hear today? I hear what you hear. You hear what I hear. Hey, are you seeing what I see today? Hey, will you look for what I should today? I see what you see. You see what I see. Hey, are you feeling what I feel today? And hey, will your heartbeat echo mine today? I feel what you feel. You feel what I feel. Hey, are you walking the same trail today? Hey, will your feet fit in my shoes today? I walk in your shoes, and you walk in my shoes.
Now, I asked earlier, does anything in the cosmos have consciousness? And if so, what things have consciousness? Is it everything? What type of consciousness and how? And I'm not going to be able to answer everything, but so far, here's what I've come to. In animism, everything, or at least most everything, is conscious in some way. There's forms of animism which suggest that this consciousness is that of multiple spirits or energies or forces, and forms which say it is the same spirit animating everything. The degree to which animism clarifies how the spirits or spirit might be aware, or be aware of being aware versus just experiencing things that happen, depends really on the type of animism we explore. But it does seem that all three of what I called 1, 2, and 3-dimensional consciousness find expression within animism in the non-human world. In the Gita, there is ultimately a single universal big S self. What we experience as our individual consciousness is actually part of Prakriti and thus not ultimately real. Are plants or rocks conscious? Animism would say yes. But it's not a question the Gita asks, although I would speculate the answer to be about the same as that for small a Atman. That is, whatever consciousness all things might possess is enmeshed in Prakriti, and therefore ultimately actually not consciousness, not big C consciousness, which is the only real consciousness. In the next episodes, I'll come back to philosophy and physics as well as other religious heritages. As I look ahead to the next episode, which I've not yet actually begun to draft, I will simply quote what I said at the end of the last episode, looking forward to this one. Between now and then, I assume the steps to explore these mysteries will get clearer, though the mystery itself will just get more mysterious if prior episodes are any indication, including this one. So, until next time.